Uh, this is Marsha Enright from Conversations with Marsha. We're sponsored by the Great Connections, which is an educational organization for young adults. We specialize in innovative programs that help them build their best future. Today we have a wonderful guest, Paul Rosenberg. He's famous for his Freeman's Perspective newsletter, his long homeschooling career, and his Cryptohippie.vpn. So welcome, Paul. I'd like to ask you this morning, tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us a little bit about your background, how you got into homeschooling.
Okay. I'm, from Rogers Park, the north side of Chicago. Ended up in the electrical business. Long involved story. I was kind of born into the construction business, but I switched into electrical, and I ended up writing the books and magazines for electrical contractors, electricians, engineers, people like that. Mm-hmm. And in the 1980s, started homeschooling because I was young and I didn't have my reasons quite as explicit as I would make them now. Mm-hmm. But I didn't have a real hard time in school. I went to the best schools in the city of Chicago at the time. They were always rated, one or two or something.
Public school? Did you go to public schools? Mm-hmm.
I did indeed.
In Rogers Park? In the Rogers Park area? Mm-hmm.
It sure did. Math or high school. And but I did fine. I had good test scores and all that, but I just was really unhappy with the schooling experience. And I really, to be honest, I did well enough in school, and like I say, had very good test scores. I didn't really start learning until I got out of school. I got into college and I quit after a few weeks. Mm-hmm. It was in high school, they were telling me where to go, where to sit, where to stand, what to do. Mm-hmm. And I detested it. But I got along. In college, at least the teachers I had, they were trying to tell me what to think and how to think. Mm-hmm. And I bolted. I'm done. I can read books.
Where did you go to college?
University of Illinois, Chicago.
Uh-huh. And you were studying electrical engineering or what?
No, I was studying business.
Oh, business.
Econ 101, Psych 101, and so on. And it was not what I wanted. It wasn't going to work for me, and I quit.
Was this like in the 70s?
Then I went.
The 70s.
Yeah. This would have been like 76 or something.
Just to give the audience an idea of how far back this aim of the left goes, to indoctrinate.
Yeah, it was indoctrination. And like I say, in high school, it was mostly, go here, do this, shut up, sit down, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. When I got into college, and I felt that they were trying to manipulate the way I thought. And sorry, mm-hmm. I can read books. I know how to do things. Mm-hmm. I'm out of here. Mm-hmm. Which created major mayhem in my family.
I'll bet.
But, I went on and I did my stuff. And that's, I guess I'm bullheaded in that way. You try to mess with my mind, goodbye. So I did my thing, and I ended up, in the electrical business, and I ended up actually teaching for Iowa State University for several years with no degree. Somehow it worked out.
So look at that. In engineering, they actually like people who know how to do things.
Yes. Engineering's kind of nice that way. But so when it got into the 1980s and I had my own children all of a sudden, I wasn't going to send them to school. I don't remember how I heard of homeschooling in the beginning. This is almost 30 years ago now.
It was
No,
pretty
almost
hush
40
hush.
years ago.
Yeah, it was pretty hush hush then. But
It was under the
you,
Jimmy Carter administration. People actually went to jail. Reagan opened it up, where you could actually, became a thing, as they say, where you could actually do this. And somehow I heard about it and I said, that's what we're doing. And so by the mid 80s, late 80s, we were homeschooling.
And how, what did you use? How did you go about doing this?
Well, first of all, we never ever registered with anybody. They're just, first of all, there was nobody to register with really in those days. They didn't understand anything, and I wasn't going to bother with them anyway. I got a variety of different pieces to a homeschooling convention. I got the great Alpha Phonics from Sam Blumenfeld, and with whom I shared a couple emails years later. And I got, picked up some curriculum there. Actually bought a bunch of curriculum over the years from a Mennonite group in Kentucky. And I had to edit what was taught because I thought they were a lot too strong in certain theological areas. But I just, edited that out. And most of their education, their material was pretty solid, pretty basic, the 3 hours sorts of things, and very affordable, and they were good to deal with. So I used them quite a bit. When it came time for high school, you had to, in those days, I presume it's this way still, you had to give them a test to get into what we used was the American school. Out of, I think they're in Lansing, Illinois now. They were in near the University of Chicago in years ago. But I think now they're in Lansing, which is a suburb. And we put them through 4 years of high school, each of them, for a very affordable price. And they got books by mail. They sent in their lessons every week, in letters in an envelope. And they finished high school very well and very quickly, and right after that they got into colleges.
So it was like it was like a correspondence homeschool program.
Precisely. And it actually had been around for over 100 years.
Wow, I didn't know that.
It was used by child actors and people like that. Who would think, right? But it existed, and it was used, and it was actually quite good. And there was a funny moment at one point. One of my kids said, "Dad, the name of the teacher is such and such." I go, "Oh my God, I know him." And he was one of my buddies from the gym. I said, "Hey, you're my kid's teacher." Yeah, I didn't want to say anything, but I am.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah. He was a lawyer, and he was actually a public prosecutor of some sort. And he took it as a side job. Yeah. But so we did that, and we got him in. It was early. They didn't, colleges weren't used to homeschoolers in these days. This would be, late 90s, let's say. And but I got community colleges, local colleges, to take them, and they did, and they all ended up going to university after.
And I understand that they're now doing very well, and they're all in high-level professions. So it sounds like it worked pretty well.
I think so. They're all doing very well.
For what you tell me, that sounds like an understatement to say that it worked very well. So sounds like you did a good job. And a lot of people, homeschooling is much more acceptable today than it ever was. But there's a lot of people who still worry about the socialization side of things. How do kids learn how to interact with their peers? What I've heard is concern about, they're great with adults, but they don't know how to interact with their peers. So what was your experience with that?
My experience was actually kind of the opposite of that. Well, they did get along really well with adults. I thought that was actually a very important thing. They would sit at the table have friends over, and they would be part of the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And they thought they ought to be part of the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was a really healthy thing. I was really happy about that. But in terms of socialization, there were always kids down the street. There was always, a sort of class, martial arts or, art class somewhere, or other homeschool kids, even in those days, where sometimes you would share a teacher or somebody who was really good at history, and would say, hey, send your kids over and I'll teach them one afternoon.
So that was part of that. So not only using the curriculum from the Mennonites, but you also would use other resources. You would send your kids to other programs, to classes, and use people who are experts in things.
Yeah, not too many programs, because again, for at least us, it was hard to find in those days.
Mm-hmm.
Homeschooling was weird.
Mm-hmm.
But we did all sorts of things, and fun things. We were living in Chicago, in the center of the city, pretty much, at one point, and had a view actually of the park. And one of the kids one day said, hey, look, they're doing something in the park. And I looked, and they were digging a big trench about 50, 60 feet off Michigan Avenue. Those of you in Chicago will understand. And I knew that that's where they buried Phil from the Chicago fire. So I went out and I talked to the guys who were digging a trench. And I said, hey guys, what you up to? Oh, we're digging a trench. They're going to put some, power lines from here to there. And I talked shop with them for a couple minutes because I could. Mm-hmm. And found out that the trench was going to be empty for 2, 3, 4 days. We canceled class. We went down there and we dug in a trench for days.
Yeah.
And pulled out all kinds of cool stuff. So you can do things like that if you're homeschooling and you're paying attention. And it was really very important. One of my daughters pretty much went into that field. And I think largely because of that. So it was, we had a great experience. And like I say, the socialization, the problems with socialization come from schools. The bad things that will enter your home, that you'll have to unteach your children, had their genesis, in our experience, in schools. Mm-hmm. And that's where the bad things came from. It did, there's...
Can you give me some examples?
Oh boy, it's a long time ago. But all of the problems, kids being bad words, okay, they didn't come from us. And they didn't come from the neighbor kids we knew their parents, and they were, they didn't speak like that in front of their kids. A lot of other things, the hypersexualization of children. All of these things, they didn't come from the kids developing themselves. They picked them up, and they picked them up pretty much, and it's not fair to say it absolutely, but pretty much through schools. I think schools negatively socialize children. They teach them to obey without thinking. They teach them that their opinion doesn't matter, that they should shut up and take it from authority. There are a lot of, there are millions of adults who in the back of their head are still obeying teacher rather than thinking for themselves. And so I found that socialization was, first of all, not really much of an issue. Besides, you're the parents. You're with them every single day, all day. If they're coming up short in something, you're going to adapt. You're going to say, oh, Susie really needs to have some more friends. I think I'm going to talk to that nice family down the street. And you can do this when they're in a regimented education system sort of thing. You're limited because they're there. You get up in the morning, you hustle like crazy to get them out the door and to school. Then you go to work, you pick them up at the end of the day. Everyone's tired. They're a little grumpy. You get them home. You try to get them fed, try to get them to do their homework, and then hustle them off into bed. every day.
Yeah.
But when you're a homeschool parent, you're actually watching the kid, and you can see Susie needs more other friends. Well, let's do something about it. Mm-hmm. So I found that socialization was actually, it's beneficial to have them not in school.
So you, one of the things you're pointing out is that you can be much more individualized in the way in which you adapt your program for your children. And
absolutely,
if you find something is a deficit, or if you find your child is exceptional in some area, you can provide them with a lot more material than what would happen in a traditional school. And this just nurtures them tremendously. And then the other thing I'm hearing from you is that in regular school, you're taught to do what you're told and not have independent judgment about what's right or wrong, what's good or bad, what you should do, what you shouldn't do, how you should do it. And you don't also have the opportunity to learn how to be creative and flexible in what you're doing to solve your problems, because everybody's doing the same thing at the same time in traditional school. So how does that prepare a young person for the future, especially in our economy, which is always changing, which requires you to adapt constantly? You have to have that ability to adapt, to be versatile.
Absolutely true, on all counts. And it's really important. And you make me remember one of my early influences that I had kind of forgotten about, Alvin Toffler. Author, was a big author. He wrote a book called The Third Wave.
Yes.
And in it, he went at some length through the overt curriculum and the covert or hidden curriculum in schools. And he was absolutely right. When you look up the quotations in the writings of the people who originated our current public schooling system, my God, they're horrifying.
Yes.
It's just, this is not what you want for your child. And one of the things that I think is important to say about homeschooling is when parents start homeschooling, and I understand why they do this, and pretty much they have to just work through it because it's kind of too much to bite off at once. They arrange their affairs so that they can't be criticized. So what they end up doing is copying the public school way. And, you know, Timmy and Johnny and Bobby are going to be in their chairs at 9 a.m. every school day. And we're going to have school until 10:30, and then we'll have recess, and then we're going to come back, and we're going to, you know, and they follow that model, which is absolutely a mechanical rather than an organic model. And humans are organisms, not machines. And what you find out after you go through it, and you have to work your way to it, because it's usually emotionally, it's too much for the parents to bite off, because everyone is going to say that they're nuts. But what you do after a while is you get up and the kids have breakfast and you get things ready. And then when everyone's ready, you sit down at the table and you start doing your stuff. You don't have to go very long in most cases. You can, especially with the littler kids who have you're working on reading, writing, and arithmetic, sometimes half an hour is enough.
Yeah.
And they learn really well. And, do something else in the afternoon, add a little something else. But even for the older kids, a few hours is okay. And put them on a project. Let them go dig in the dirt. Let them try to rebuild a motor. Let them whatever. Yeah. And homeschooling is far easier than people think it is once they actually get over the hump of, I'm afraid people are going to criticize me, and actually work with the kid and see what this child needs, what I can give them. Once you kind of get in a groove with that, it's way easier than people think.
Well, and you make a good point. A couple of points I'm getting from what you're saying is, one is people have this idea that everybody has to be doing the same thing. If my child is going to succeed, he has to be going through education the same way everybody else who's successful has gone through. And so they don't realize that no, regimentation is actually contra to the best development of the child. Montessori has this dictum, the mystery of the child. You don't know what's going on inside the developing person, and each person is so individual and unique, and they have their own interests, their abilities, experiences. So actually, if you adapt what you need for each child, you're going to get them to learn a lot faster and a lot better than if you regiment them to what everybody else is doing. Most people don't realize this, but this whole system of public schooling came from Prussia in the 17th century. And Horace Mann brought it over here, and it's specifically was created to get the German people, the Prussian people, to be regimented so that they would be good in their army. People don't realize this. It sounds crazy, but that is the source of it. So
it's true, and you read quotes from Johann Gottlieb Fichte and people like that,
yeah.
And you're horrified. You say this can't be real, but it is.
Yeah. The other thing that you were saying is the fact that having this the children be able to do projects. There's all this time. You spend much less time on nonsense that happens in regular schools. I think if you documented how much time students spent waiting in line, moving from place to place, waiting for the other kids to be ready to do things, it's a huge waste of time. I have a friend who used the Chicago Virtual Charter School, which used the Edie Hirsch classical books program.
I know Edie Hirsch, yeah.
Yeah, and so this family, the children are extraordinarily bright, but even so, they would get done in 3 hours every morning, and they would, with the entire curriculum they were supposed to do, and with the whole thing by April. So they were going, and this was a very difficult curriculum compared to your average traditional school curriculum. So
can you imagine trying to keep 30 kids all on the same page with everything? They're all varied. They're all individuals. They're all very, very different. And you end up going according to the slowest kids, and the faster kids are bored stiff.
Exactly. Yeah. Two things I wanted to ask you. Well, one comment I wanted to make was going back to the socialization. One of the things that I think is good is that you're not getting that hyper emphasis on the social strata that you have in a regular school, where, it depends on, okay, how old you are and what social group do you belong to, and are you with the cool kids or aren't you? That's not going on in homeschool. And that is very damaging to children.
Oh, I think it's a horrible, horrible thing. I call it the dominance hierarchy.
Yeah.
And it's contrary to human nature, at least to the better elements of human nature.
Yes. Yeah. And it damages people who are, maybe they don't quite fit in, but they're with the popular or what's considered normal among the kids. And that they carry it with them as they become adults. And it's horrible because those kids, if they were nurtured the right way in an individualized way, could totally flourish. And who knows how much human potential we've lost by doing this.
It's huge. I actually did some work on that once. I was, not too many years ago, I was thinking about this sort of thing. And I thought, my God, those poor kids that I went to school with. Because there was some significant number. I mean, these were nice families, nice neighborhood, nice schools. This wasn't, low income, difficult, drug addict parents and everything. These were all nice families. 3% maybe of the kids were tortured at school.
Yes.
Tortured. There's no other way. There's no nice way to put it. And I wrote an article on it called At 8 Years Old, We Learned to Torture.
Yes. Yes.
And I mean, I wasn't the victim of it. I wasn't the victimizer, I just ended up being on the edges of it, but I still wish I could have done more to help those kids. There's no other way to say it. They were tortured every day at school.
Yes.
And it's 3%, maybe 5% of the kids. Like you say, my God, what sort of human damage has been destroyed? And it was just heartbreaking, because I wrote this article and I put it out to, several thousand people at least read it. And I got comments, and they said, Paul, that was me.
Yeah.
Not at your school, but it was me. And all of I did a comparison of school bullying, school torture, I call it, because it really is, compared to PTSD and soldiers, through that, and they're all the same. They're all the same characteristics. And I had people saying, yeah, all of those things were true for me. Thanks for saying.
Yeah, and
wow.
It's absolutely terrible what happened to the victims. And then think about the terrible things it did to the perpetrators, because their children, they don't really exactly know what they're doing. They have some idea that maybe it's wrong, but what do they carry with themselves that they treated other people that way the rest of their life? What does that do to their own psyche? And
that's a great question.
Does it twist it? Does it force them to become worse because they have to deny that what they did was wrong? Or do they become tortured with guilt? I mean, it's the whole program is a mess, what it does to people psychologically.
Yeah, it's forced grouping, and it's unhealthy.
Yeah, exactly. I want to ask you a practical question, because a lot of people have this. How did you fit the homeschooling into your life when did you had your career going? Did your wife have a career going? How did you fit that in?
Well, it's hard. She was a stay-at-home mom. So that worked. I always tell when people are asking me questions about homeschooling, I'm obviously an advocate, but I'm very, very careful to always open up, or at least towards the beginning, saying there are going to be days that suck. Because there will be. Yeah. And it's hard. It's not easy. It's not the easy way to do things. There are parts of it that are very hard. Now, it's very rewarding. Your children will be better for it. You will be better for it. A lot of what I do now is take complicated things or difficult concepts and translate them into simple language. Well, I got my deep education in that with my kids.
Absolutely.
Because I had, hey, Dad, what's the difference between communism and capitalism? Well, if you're going to explain that to a 10-year-old, you better really understand it.
Yeah.
And so,
So that helped you in your personal life, in your professional life. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, definitely.
Is there anything you would have done different looking back on it?
Not terribly much. No, I think probably not. The only hard part, especially in those days, not so much now, was when your kids got to be, 10, 12, 14 years old, and they would go somewhere else and they'd see other kids and go, hey, what school do you go to?
Yeah. And
you were essentially, to them, you were forcing them to be weird.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, and so that was an issue. There's really no way around it. And it's getting to be less of a thing. Homeschooling now there's, I don't know what the number are, 2-3 million children in the United States who are homeschooled. And it's not a problem like it was then, but that was an issue then. But there's really nothing to be done about it. And I really don't think of a whole lot that we could have done different. Getting over the thing where you have to be, you can't be criticized, that sort of thing, and just loosening up and doing it. But that's just a process you have to go through. So not too much.
You mean the parents at first feeling like they can't be criticized. I see.
Right. Yeah. And loosening up and just doing the job rather than having other people's opinions hanging over your head.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, even, as I mentioned to you, I started a Montessori school that went from 3 years old to 15 so that my children could have an authentic Montessori education, which
Mm-hmm.
has so many of the best elements of what you're talking about, with projects and individualization. And there we were constantly having to help the parents with their uncertainty about using this entirely different way of educating their children. They had so much
Right.
pressure from their family, their peers, the neighbors, and even their own doubts about it,
Sure.
So we're constantly battling that. You mentioned about increase in homeschooling. I think there's an explosion in homeschooling, and because of this COVID problem, lockdown, and I wonder how much of it is going to remain as people realize their kids aren't getting very much with this online schooling from the authorities, and maybe it's not so hard to teach them lots of things while they're home. So I'm going to be really curious to see what happens.
Yeah, me too. That's kind of the question of the hour. Is
Exactly.
A lot of parents are doing it because, well, they've been forced to. It's a crazy thing when you think about it. This model of schooling, when you think about it, for pretty much everybody in the Western world, the school was the center of all family architecture. What
Mm-hmm.
everything was designed around was the school.
Mm-hmm.
And, where Mondays and Tuesdays we're going to do this, everything, the center of all scheduling was the school.
Mm-hmm.
And in a moment, it was just ripped out.
Yes.
That's really,
it's bizarre.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think, from my standpoint, very stupid on the part of the school operators.
Yes.
Because what's keeping them going, has kept them going, is simply inertia. Mom and dad did it, grandma and grandpa did it, everybody did it. If you don't do it, you're weird. So that was their one advantage.
Right. And so now that parents see that, oh, it doesn't have to be that way, it'll be really curious to see what happens.
Yeah.
Afterwards.
Yeah, I'm with you.
And I hope that there can be, I know they were talking about in the Federal Department of Education was talking about really pushing the idea of giving the money to the parents to figure out what they should do with it. And that would be a total game changer if that happens.
Oh, absolutely. And it's eminently sensible.
Yeah.
What parents can't decide where their children go to school.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, there might be some bad parents who don't. Well, there's always one or two bad parents. You can't, build around, what could maybe possibly go wrong. Well, something goes wrong in the school system, as we're talking about these kids being tortured every day.
Every day.
Every day.
Well, and worse in the worst schools. I mean, we're talking about real violence and no learning going on. Some huge proportion coming out of school with zero literacy, and that's frightening. What's happening there? It just adds to all the problems. So.
Yeah, I actually had it's a long involved story, but I actually had some involvement with the what did they call them in those days? They didn't call them at-risk children. They called them whatever, kids from really bad neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm.
And I dealt with them for a period of time. They didn't have any skills.
Yes.
And I thought, my God, what's going to happen to these poor kids?
Yes, it's sickening. It's just sickening. If you want to understand the huge rise in crime in those areas and so many other problems, the drug use, all of that, look to the schools and what's happened with them. I mean, that's a big problem. I don't want to keep you on too long. I was wondering, one last question. As a businessman, are there any issues you see with young people today that you think are related to their education? Maybe hiring people or dealing with them,
It's a good question. I don't do that anymore. I used to hire people, and it just got so difficult, and the IRS with filing these forms and those forms and the other forms, And if you file it, a day late, you're going to get fined all kinds of. I said, you know what? It's just not worth it having employees anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I found niches where I could operate where I didn't have to have any employees.
Gotcha.
And I did. I used to have employees, and I was happy to employ people. I was just happy to do it, but
mm-hmm.
they made it.
So you don't have much experience lately with this?
No, I really don't.
Okay.
I really don't. I'm the wrong guy to ask that question. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Well, I really appreciate your time and your insight, your experience. I think it's quite educational for people who might be listening. And thank you for coming on here. It's been a delightful conversation.
My pleasure. Thank you.
You're welcome. And I just want to remind listeners that we'll put notes about Paul and his companies and his newsletter in the notes to the video. And I want to remind them to please visit our website, thegreatconnections.org. If you have any young people who need help shaping their future, we're there to help them. And we've had great results with our students over the years. We hope that we can help yours. All right, thank you very much.